I grew up in what was then a small town called Hampton, Virginia, on the coast, the Lower Peninsula, known as Tidewater, now known as Hampton Roads. Very interesting place to live if you were a Negro in the 40s and 50s, when segregation was what we knew and practiced. And all of the people around us were the people who were our role models. The interesting thing about a town like Hampton is we were surrounded by military bases. And if you think about the fact that the country was just coming out of World War II and going into the Cold War, at that time you could not get near a Navy base without somebody coming after you. You had to have a badge, you had to have a clearance, you had to have some authorization, and therefore, as far as we were concerned as kids, whatever happened beyond those gates was a secret. We didn't ask any questions. Okay? Plus the fact we were raised to be seen and not heard anyway. Okay, so it's in this setting that in the second grade, I noticed that two of my classmates are wearing brown dresses and these little brown hats with something that looked like a stem sticking out of the top of them. And so I said to them, what's this about? And they say, oh, we're Brownie Girl Scouts and we meet at Bethel AME Church on Wednesday afternoons, and Mrs. Jackson's a leader and we have fun and you should join. So I did. And thank goodness we were only Brownies for about a year, because I didn't think they did a whole lot. And so what you need to know is at the time Girl Scouting had 3 levels: Brownies, Intermediates, and Seniors. I was very happy to get to the intermediate troop because Mrs. Jackson was still the leader, but there were a lot more things to do. And she kept us busy from the minute we got there until the minute we left. So I'm happy now. A few weeks after the troop started, Mrs. Jackson announced that we had earned the Good Housekeeping Badge. Good Housekeeping Badge was a pretty little badge with a white teacup on it and steam rising out of it. I was so proud. I'd go home and I'm going to show my mother, my grandmother, the first badge I've earned, the Good Housekeeping Badge, and they look at it and they hear me and they start to laugh. How could you, the most undomestic person in the world, have earned a Good Housekeeping Badge? And they continued to get a lot of fun out of it, but then Mrs. Jackson was a woman of her word, so if she said we earned it, we had earned it. But now I'm starting to question, so I go get my Girl Scout handbook, and I'm thrumming through all these badges looking for good housekeeping, and all of a sudden I realize that there are a lot of activities in here that Mrs. Jackson has been having us do in the troop meetings. Mrs. Jackson has us working on Girl Scout badges without our knowing it. I thought she was such a smart woman. But then it becomes summertime. Mrs. Jackson does not like to camp, but she is not going to have any of her girls miss an opportunity because it's something she doesn't like to do. So she suggests we go to day camp or resident camp. At the time, there was only one resident camp in the area that Negro kids could go to. Camp James River outside of Williamsburg. The Black Boy Scouts went for 2 weeks. The Black Girl Scouts went for 2 weeks. The Black Catholic Church went for 2 weeks. And I don't know who they found black to go after that. But this is what I have to tell you about Mrs. Jackson. Mrs. Jackson was a take-charge woman. She wasn't the kind of take-charge that made you feel stupid. She was the kind of take-charge woman that kind of put the pavement paths down and you could follow them and you felt like you had really accomplished something. So when Mrs. Jackson suggests something, it's more than that. When she suggested that we go to resident camp or day camp, she had a meeting with our parents. She had the day camp forms, the resident camp forms, the campus trip forms. She told us how much money from the cookie sale was going to be allotted to each of us. And she said to the parents, and if you still can't quite get all of it together, I know community organizations that will help to make up the difference. And of course she did, because she was in all of them. So she was an absolutely wonderful person. And very soon, we left intermediate camp, Troop 11, intermediate Troop 11, and went to senior Troop 60. But of the 30 girls who were in intermediates, only about 8 of us went into seniors. Well, I can understand that. Because really, to be a Girl Scout when you're going in high school, not a cool thing to do. But for the 8 of us, it was really great because we were small enough now that we could meet at Mrs. Jackson's house. And we did. And I don't know that we did a whole lot of certifiably Girl Scout activities at that point, but we had lots of adult-girl conversations. Imagine what adult-girl conversations in the 50s were like compared to today. But hey, we learned to be good women, and that was great. So when we got to my junior year of high school, Mrs. Jackson suggested that I apply to go to the All States Encampment in Cody, Wyoming, which was a national event in which 2 girls from each state would be selected to attend. So, of course, she helped me with my application. I applied, I was accepted, and hey, that was wonderful. I'm going to Cody, Wyoming. But then it came with a caveat. You had to be able to mountain hike and carry a pack weighing at least 15 pounds on your back. Now, you remember, I live in coastal Virginia, no mountains, and I would never voluntarily carry a pack of any size on my back. So I'm saying this is a non-starter, this is not gonna happen. But Mrs. Jackson never takes no. This is a woman of infinite resources. She scouts around and finds one of her co-workers, a white woman named Helen Mulcahy, to take me on. Helen Mulcahy grew up in the mountains of Virginia. It's nothing for her to do this. And she has me out at the beach carrying a pack on my back, trudging around in the sand to build up my stamina. And several weeks later, we come up to the Shenandoah. And she's going to teach me how to hike in the mountains and how to do primitive camping, both of which she did. I mean, she crammed everything she could into my head over a 3-week period. But that was not the great adventure of that weekend. The great adventure of that weekend was coming down the mountains when Miss Mulcahy either put her car in low gear or no gear. I do not remember which. I simply remember we were whizzing down the mountain. And Miss Mulcahy was having a high old time. I mean, she must have done this dozens of times because it wasn't fazing her. Meanwhile, I am becoming very intimate with the passenger door. I am almost a part of the frame. And Miss Mulcahy is asking me questions. I'm so terrified I can't even speak. I was so glad to get to flat land. I could have kissed the pavement. I survived. I also survived, but let me say this back up. Miss Mulcahy did not do this out of the goodness of her heart about me going to camp, and I got there. She did it because she respected Mrs. Jackson. And in that period of time, when you think about a segregated South, there was not usually that kind of relationship. So this was another part of who Mrs. Jackson was. I also survived Algebra 2 and geometry because Mrs. Jackson tutored me. And she actually made it make sense, which in that day and time I thought nobody could make Algebra 2 and geometry make sense. And she was a person that I talked to a lot of afternoons because I would be going back and forth to school. I passed her house every day. I'd stop and talk to her. My mother worked double shift at the hospital. So having another adult to talk to was wonderful, and she was like a second mother to me. And then there came the junior prom. Now, I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but I will say to you, you have to be a fat girl to have this experience. And I was not plump, I was not chubby, I was fat. And if you're a little fat girl and you're trying to find a special dress for a special occasion, especially a gown for a prom, oh my God, is that painful. Well, Mrs. Jackson didn't like to camp, and she didn't like to cook. but she could sew up a blue streak. She made my prom dress, and it was beautiful, and I felt wonderful. And those are the kinds of things that endear adults to children for the rest of their lives. This woman was like a second mother. I thought she was brilliant. She could do anything. Much later, more recently in my life, this thing about Hidden Figures came out. And there Mrs. Jackson's girls discovered that Mary Winston Jackson was an aeronautical engineer at NASA. My Mrs. Jackson. We were so proud you would have thought we were all engineers. And at the same time, we felt kind of stupid. Why didn't we know this? But as I said to you, we lived in a time when you didn't ask what went on behind those gates. And Mrs. Jackson was very busy helping us become young women. She never said what she did, except to be who she was. So it didn't matter to us what she did professionally. What mattered to us was who Mrs. Jackson was to us.